About consistence. Text by Thich. Please subscribe the channel. Visit the book site www.books.th-om.com. The consistency of systems. Our World and Nirvana. One of the descriptions of the general lack of understanding of the true striving to find love is called cognitive incomprehension. This barrier is said to be what prevents us from remembering a deeper reality behind the illusions of our world. The starting point of observation that allows us to abstract is the recognized diametrically opposed perspective. This means that if we recognize that here, too, a judgment, ultimately constructed from a lack of information, is the cause, thus, we recognize the structures, we can step beyond them. Understandable and flowing. The understanding of what truth, stringent reason, love, actually is, without any context, in its primal form, lies so infinitely far from our minds for one simple reason, even though it is so close, right there with us, the system of thought, the logical construction that describes our lived, visible, 3D world, is completely consistent. Let's look at what the term consistent means. Flexible system. The construction of our thinking, its organization, is functional. The system is supple, flexible, one thing fits into another, cogs mesh, there is a logical explanation for everything. With the help of our cognitive abilities, we grasp this wholeness, which is reflected in what we live in society. A lack of these abilities could be interpreted as stupidity, but it is by no means a lack of intellectual ability that prevents us from recognizing the perfectly loving reality of love in our lives, which can only be glimpsed with the help of the diametrically opposed understanding of thought. Missing tools. Rather, the very system of understanding to which we adhere, which binds us, withholds the tools necessary to recognize its non-existence. The system itself resists knowledge by being deeply concealed in its true structure. The fact that these veils, these layers of a sugar-coated surface, completely distract us, always sending us in the wrong, correct directions, is exposed as ego presence. Stringent ego logic. The worldview we could currently paint revels in the premises of this consistent logical framework. Everything emerges from stringent ego logic. There we find death, all kinds of emotions, such as hatred, lust for power, avarice, envy, constant resentment. Even illness, suffering, and war are basic algorithms of this construction, which are inescapably contained in constant comparison, exhausted in judgment, consistent chaos. Well, the big misunderstanding is, this utter chaos of nonsense appears, albeit ultimately only superficially, consistent. It flows, it functions, it can be explained logically, albeit always in a fragmented way, up to a certain point. And from its very nature, with all its intellectuality, it excludes the possibility that anything else could exist. It sees itself, what tremendous nonsense, as absolute, as omnipotent. Thus, we can describe the starting point of our thinking, as the world does, without further ado, as consistent, real, and absolute. Ungraspable with our thinking. In this conviction, namely, to live in a fixed world with prescribed rules, with rigid concepts, in a society as it is described in countless concepts, we are unable to anticipate that there is something else, diametrically opposed, something that cannot be grasped with the principles of our social thinking. Something that is consistent even beneath the surface, because it represents consistency itself. Signs of the great untruth. So what happens when we embark on the path to somehow-like knowledge? We learn bit by bit about the existence of this diametrically opposed logical framework. We can, with our reason, by no means the reason of society, given by the love of creation, increasingly recognize signs that we are living a great untruth, that we are trapped in suffering and resentment, in death and illness, ultimately in judgment, in a discomfort that was never intended for us. And what we initially only suspect gradually becomes a certainty on our path, entirely without our doing. The only reality is love. It is the only functioning, logical framework, it is the only cause. One-way thinking. The major error in thinking, the seemingly insurmountable barrier to enlightenment, is the assumption that this, our lived framework of thought, is the only one that exists, and that everything else is merely unprovable, esoteric trash. We live in a functioning system to which we have become accustomed. We have adapted to it, including the negative implications, which definitely outweigh the positive ones. We have come to terms with it. Too good to be true. We see ourselves as earthbound, rational people in a defined world. And what is promised there, as a sacred reality to be known, recently even by scientists, is so beautiful that, given the completely opposite situation we represent, in which we exist, we do not consider it real, in any way feasible. Through the lens of society, we can only see figments of the imagination. But there has always been this doubt. Cruel functioning. The mistake is that life functions precisely and cruelly. It works obviously and relentlessly. It flows rapidly, it bubbles. It is quite consistent, as is the path to nirvana, to enlightenment. That's a problem. That's confusing. But there comes a point at which this functioning of the physical world collapses. The day, the minute, when this garishly painted image develops a crack. The previous thinking no longer works. Diametrically opposed information becomes so clear that it can no longer be denied. A new truth, a fascinating reality, proves itself. We are love. This supposedly new, tender world, this new loving truth, is nothing other than what we actually are, what we have always been. However, we live our supposed, now, in the historical dimension, the physical world, in a world of thoughts that arose from the first judgment of good and evil. A construction of depressive illusions that inevitably has to prove values such as death, illness, war, and resentment. This world of thought has wrapped us up in its premises and algorithms. We are submerged in them. We no longer see anything else. Can love be a lie? The new, sacred truth, this diametrically opposed life proclaimed by reality, is nothing but the loving tenderness of creation, which has always been ours. Thus, the only question arises, how could true, real love, from creation and from the hearts of humanity, ever be a lie? We must recognize that we were created neither for sacrifice nor for suffering, but rather that we are concentrated light of love, born in and from love to dissolve all negativity throughout the eons. Conclusion. As soon as we allow love to guide our thinking, in every possible consequence, as soon as we recognize that there has never been an outside, that our subjective world also originates from our subjective self, as soon as we recognize our divine power, it also becomes clear to us that only this, the only true way, is to actually change the world into a holy, peaceful one, to live in loving thoughts, to respond in tenderness. Please subscribe the channel. Visit the book site, www.books.th-om.com.